What if the universe has an answer it was never supposed to show you? Mathematics is the closest thing humanity has ever produced to absolute truth. Not approximate truth, not contextual truth, not the kind of truth that shifts depending on who is telling it and who is listening and what year it happens to be. Absolute truth. The kind that does not care about your feelings or your culture or your politics or your faith. The kind that was true before anyone was alive to know it and will be true long after the last human mind capable of understanding it has gone dark. 2 + 2 = 4 before there were numbers to express it. The ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter was what it was before there were circles drawn by human hands. Mathematics does not require a witness. It simply is. This is why mathematicians trust it more than they trust almost anything else. It is the one discipline where you can be certain. Where proof means proof, not probably, not likely, not supported by the available evidence. Proof. Certain. Done. Unassailable. And this is why what happened to Thomas Vael is so deeply, fundamentally, bone-level disturbing to everyone who has studied it. Because Thomas Vael was a mathematician. He believed in proof more than he believed in anything else. He had spent 22 years attempting to prove something that the mathematical community had widely accepted could not be proven, a problem so deep, so structurally embedded in the foundations of mathematics itself, that most of his colleagues had quietly, privately, with the kind of gentle professional concern that academics extend to brilliant people they think have gone slightly too far down a particular road, suggested that he might find more productive ways to spend his considerable gifts. He did not find more productive ways. He kept working. And on the night of April 3, 2024, alone in his office at ETH Zurich, with a cold cup of coffee on his desk and the city lights of Zurich visible through the window and the whiteboard in front of him that he had been filling and erasing and filling again for 2 decades, he finished the proof. He solved it. He solved a problem that should not be solvable, using mathematics that should not be possible, arriving at an answer that should not exist. And then he was gone. The proof is still on the whiteboard. Nobody has erased it. This is his story. This is the story of the man who followed the logic all the way to the end and found, at the end, not a conclusion but a door. And this is the story of what happens when the most rigorous, most certain, most unassailably precise discipline in human history produces an answer that cannot exist in the world we know, and the man who found it decides to follow it into the world where it can. Part 1. The Mountain City and the Man Who Lived Inside Numbers. Zurich is a city that suits mathematics. There is something in its quality, the precision of its architecture, the clarity of its lake on a good day, the orderly efficiency of its trams running exactly when they are supposed to run, the sense that the city has been organized by people who believe that the world is fundamentally comprehensible and have committed to demonstrating this belief in every aspect of their civic infrastructure. That makes it a natural home for people who spend their lives in pursuit of certainty. The Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH Zurich, has been producing mathematicians and physicists of the first rank since 1855, and the mathematics department occupies a building on the main campus that has the dignified, slightly worn quality of a place where serious work has been done for a very long time and where the work is more important than the decor. Thomas Vael had occupied an office on the 4th floor of this building for 16 years. Before that, he had been a postdoctoral researcher in Cambridge, and before that a doctoral student in Paris, and before that an undergraduate in his home city of Ghent, Belgium, where he had grown up as the eldest of 3 children in a family of engineers who understood mathematics as a practical tool and were quietly baffled by their son's insistence on treating it as something closer to philosophy. His father designed bridges. His mother designed drainage systems. They were excellent at what they did. They built things that stood up and carried weight and moved water in the right direction. They were proud of Thomas's academic career in the sincere and slightly bewildered way of parents who recognize greatness in their child without fully understanding what it is greatness at. Thomas was not interested in building things. Thomas was interested in the structure of things, the deep, invisible, abstract structure that underlay all physical reality, the mathematical skeleton of the universe that existed independent of any particular bridge or drainage system or galaxy or particle. He was interested in the questions that sat at the foundation of mathematics itself, questions about what mathematics was, what it could know, what it could prove, where its edges were, and what lay beyond them. He was, in the taxonomy of mathematical research, a pure mathematician, not applied. Not concerned with the practical utility of what he found, concerned only with truth, with the hard, cold, non-negotiable truth of what could and could not be proven within a given mathematical framework. This is a rare disposition even among mathematicians, who tend toward at least some engagement with the physical world their mathematics describes. Thomas had essentially no such engagement. He lived inside numbers the way other people live inside languages or relationships or landscapes, completely, naturally, with no sense that there was anything unusual about finding the most real part of reality to be the part that has no physical existence at all. His colleagues at ETH described him with consistent warmth and consistent puzzlement. He was generous with his time, patient with students, capable of explaining extraordinarily complex ideas with a clarity that made him an exceptional teacher. He was also, they said, somewhere else. Not distracted, present, engaged, responsive. But somewhere else simultaneously, the way a person can be fully in a room while also being fully in a memory, two locations at once, both entirely real. The somewhere else, for Thomas, was the problem. Part 2. The problem. The problem that Thomas Vael spent 22 years attempting to solve does not have a simple name. In the internal shorthand of the pure mathematics community, it is sometimes referred to as the Vael problem, which is both an honor and a slight. An honor because attaching a mathematician's name to a problem indicates that the community has recognized the problem as real and significant and the mathematician as its primary investigator. And a slight because it also indicates that the community does not expect the problem to be solved and has therefore filed it, affectionately, under the mathematician's personal obsession rather than the general program of mathematical progress. In the simplest possible terms that necessarily sacrifice precision for accessibility, which Thomas would have found uncomfortable but would have accepted as pragmatically necessary for this account. The problem concerned the relationship between mathematical completeness and mathematical consistency. These are technical concepts with a deep history rooted in the foundational crises of early 20th century mathematics, and they connect, at their roots, to the work of Kurt Gödel, whose incompleteness theorems of 1931 demonstrated that any sufficiently powerful mathematical system must contain statements that are true but unprovable within that system. Gödel's theorems were, and remain, among the most profound and disturbing results in the history of human thought. They established, with absolute mathematical rigor, that mathematics cannot fully know itself. That there are things that are true that mathematics cannot reach. Thomas accepted Gödel. Everyone accepted Gödel. But Thomas had believed since his doctoral work, had spent 22 years building the case for, that Gödel's boundary was not fixed, that the edge of what mathematics could prove was not a wall but a horizon, and that a sufficiently extended mathematical framework, developed along specific lines that he had been sketching and refining and extending for 2 decades, could reach statements that were beyond the standard horizon. Not all statements. Not Gödel's theorem itself, which remained a permanent feature of any powerful enough system. But specific statements of a particular structural type that Thomas had identified and characterized over years of work, that existed in a region between the provable and the formally unprovable, a region he called, in his published work, the penumbra, and in his private notebooks, much more simply, the edge. He believed that if you built the right framework, if you extended mathematics in the right direction, with the right tools, with sufficient care and sufficient nerve, you could reach the edge. And at the edge, he believed, there was something. Not nothing. Something. A result. An answer. The thing that pure mathematics had been approaching asymptotically for its entire history without ever quite arriving. His colleagues thought this was beautiful and probably impossible. They published papers engaging with parts of his framework and finding the parts they engaged with rigorous and interesting. They nominated him for prizes. They invited him to give lectures. They also, quietly, among themselves, used the word obsession in a tone that was not entirely admiring. Thomas didn't mind. He kept working. Part 3, 22 years. The notebooks recovered from Thomas's office and his Zurich apartment after his disappearance number 47. They are uniform in appearance, A4 format, black covers, unlined pages, the same brand purchased in bulk from a mathematical supplies retailer in Zurich, and they span the 22 years of work on the problem, from the first tentative formulations in 2002 to the final dense pages of the last notebook, which ends 3 days before his disappearance with a single line that his colleagues have described, with the mixture of awe and grief appropriate to the circumstance, as the most beautiful piece of mathematical writing any of them have ever seen. The notebooks tell a story. Not a narrative story, they are mathematical notebooks, full of notation and diagrams and the crossed-out false starts and the marginal annotations and the occasional exclamation mark of a person working alone through something very hard, but a story nonetheless. The story of a mind engaging with a problem over decades, building something enormous and intricate and invisible, a cathedral of pure logic that exists nowhere in physical space but is as real and as structurally sound as anything ever built from stone. The early notebooks are exploratory. Thomas is feeling for the edges of the problem, testing approaches, building the foundational framework he will need. The middle notebooks, roughly notebooks 12 through 35, are the construction phase, dense and sustained and showing the marks of a person who has found their footing and is building with confidence. The late notebooks show something else, a narrowing, a convergence, the sense of a vast apparatus of logic slowly, inexorably pointing toward a single point, the way a lens focuses light. The last notebook, number 47, is different from all the others in one specific way. The handwriting is slower, more deliberate. Not because Thomas was struggling. The mathematics in the final notebook is, by the account of the colleagues who have worked through it, the most fluent and assured of his career. The handwriting is slower because he knew he was close and he was giving each step the full weight of his attention. He was not rushing toward the answer. He was walking toward it, carefully, the way you walk toward something rare and possibly startled that you do not want to frighten away. The final entry in the last notebook is dated April 2, 2024, the night before his disappearance. It is a single paragraph of prose, not mathematics, which is unusual enough in his notebooks to arrest anyone who reads it. Tomorrow I finish it. I know what the final step is. I have known for 3 days and I have been sitting with the knowledge the way you sit with something before you act on it, making sure you understand what acting will mean. I understand what it will mean. The framework I have built does not lead to the answer as a value or a quantity or a proposition in any conventional mathematical sense. It leads to the answer as a structure, a thing that has the logical properties of a door rather than a number. I do not know what is on the other side. I know, with complete mathematical certainty, that something is. That is enough. That has always been enough. Tomorrow I open it. He underlined the last 3 words. He went to bed. He got up the next morning and went to his office and opened it. Part 4. The night of April 3rd. The security logs at ETH Zurich show Thomas Vael entering his office building at 7:43 a.m. on April 3, 2024. This was not unusual. He routinely arrived before 8, before the department filled up, in the quiet hours that he found most productive. The security log shows no exit. His colleague and the closest thing he had to a research partner, a 41-year-old French mathematician named Dr. Isabelle Moreau, who occupied the office 2 doors down from his and who had been following the development of Thomas's framework for 8 years with a combination of professional fascination and personal loyalty that made her, in many ways, the person who understood his work best after Thomas himself, saw him briefly in the corridor at approximately 11 in the morning. She described him as focused in a way that was distinct even by his standards. Not tense. Not agitated. Focused in the way a lens is focused. Everything converged, everything aligned, all the available light gathered to a single point. She asked if he wanted lunch. He said, "Not today. I think today I finish." She understood what he meant. She had been hearing variations of this for 8 years, but something in the way he said it today was different. She told a colleague afterward, before she knew he was gone, when she still thought he had simply worked through the night, that he said it the way you say something when you mean it literally, when there is no hedge in the words at all. She went to lunch without him. The building's internal CCTV shows Thomas entering his office at 11:17 a.m. and closing the door. The door has a lock. A standard academic office lock, operated from the inside by a thumb turn and from the outside by a key. The door does not open again for the rest of the day on any recorded footage. At 11:52 p.m., 12 hours and 35 minutes after he closed the door, the building's security system registered a temperature anomaly in the 4th floor corridor outside his office. Not an alarm-level anomaly. A notation in the system log, a brief, localized temperature drop of approximately 4 degrees Celsius, lasting 19 seconds, in the corridor directly outside room 412. The system categorized this as a ventilation irregularity and logged it without triggering any alert. Nobody saw it until the log was reviewed days later. At 11:53 p.m., 1 minute after the temperature anomaly, Thomas Vael sent a text message. The message was to Isabelle Moreau. She was asleep when it arrived. She read it at 6:47 a.m., 17 minutes before she walked down the corridor to his office and found the door locked and knocked and received no answer. The message said, "It's done. The proof is complete. The answer is a door. I'm going. Tell them the whiteboard is the proof, all of it. Don't erase anything. Tell them the last line is the answer and the answer is an instruction, not a value. I'm sorry this is the way I have to say goodbye. You are the best colleague I ever had." Isabelle read the message standing in her kitchen in her dressing gown with her coffee going cold, and she called his phone immediately, 3 times, and each time it rang through to voicemail. She drove to the campus. She knocked on his door. She went to the department administrator. She got a key. The office was locked from the inside. The thumb turn was in the locked position. She unlocked it from the outside, the only way it could be unlocked from the outside, and opened the door. Part 5. What was in the room? The room was undisturbed. This is the first thing Isabelle said later, to the police. Not that it was empty, but that it was undisturbed. The distinction mattered to her. An empty room is a room that a person has left. An undisturbed room is a room where nothing has happened. Except something had happened. Something enormous and irreversible and complete had happened in that room. The room was undisturbed in the way that the site of a controlled detonation is undisturbed, everything in its place, everything precisely as it was, and yet something is categorically different from how it was before. Thomas's coat was on the hook behind the door. His bag was under the desk. His phone was on the desk, face up, screen dark, battery at 4%. His wallet was in his coat pocket. His reading glasses were folded on the notebook beside the cold cup of coffee that he had apparently made at some point and not drunk. On the windowsill, a small succulent plant that Isabel had given him 3 years ago because she thought his office needed something living in it. Still alive, still green, leaning toward the window light. The whiteboard dominated the room the way it always had, floor to ceiling, wall to wall, the largest whiteboard the university's facilities department had been willing to provide when Thomas had requested it 8 years ago and which had, in 8 years, been filled and erased and filled again more times than anyone had counted. But today it was not erased. Today it was the fullest it had ever been. 12 pages of dense, sustained, unbroken mathematical argument, written in Thomas's characteristic hand, small, precise, slightly forward-leaning, covering every centimeter of available space. Beginning in the upper left corner and ending. Isabel's eyes went there immediately, the way your eyes go to the last page of a book you've been reading for a long time, in the lower right. The ending was a single symbol. Not a number. Not an operator. Not any element of standard mathematical notation. A symbol that Thomas had apparently developed specifically for this purpose, that appeared nowhere in his published work or his notebooks, that none of his colleagues had seen before, that seemed to have been created in the moment it was needed, which is itself a remarkable thing, because mathematical notation is almost never invented in the final line of a proof. Notation is the scaffolding. You build the scaffolding before you build the building. You do not invent a new kind of support structure at the moment you place the last stone. And yet there it was. A symbol unlike anything in any mathematical tradition, drawn with the calm finality of something that had always existed and had simply been waiting to be written down. Isabel stood in front of the whiteboard for a very long time. She is a mathematician. She understood what she was looking at, or rather, she understood the first 11.5 pages of what she was looking at, and she understood that the final half page represented something her framework could not yet fully process. And she understood that the last symbol was not a conclusion in any conventional sense but was, as Thomas's text message had said, an instruction. She did not know what the instruction said. She knew, standing in that room in the early morning with Thomas's coffee cold on his desk and his coat on his hook and his phone at 4% battery, that whatever it said, Thomas had followed it. She called the police. She did not erase the whiteboard. Part 6. The proof. The formal mathematical analysis of Thomas Vael's final proof, the content of the whiteboard, photographed in its entirety and distributed to mathematical institutions around the world in the weeks following his disappearance, is ongoing. It will likely remain ongoing for years. Pure mathematics moves slowly, and a proof of this density and originality requires the kind of sustained, careful verification that cannot be rushed without being corrupted. What can be reported, with the caveat that the full picture is not yet available, is this. The proof has been reviewed, in whole or in part, by 43 mathematicians at 17 institutions across 12 countries. Of those 43, 39 have verified the sections they examined as logically sound. The remaining 4 have not found errors. They have found sections they cannot yet follow, which is a different thing entirely, and which reflects the reach of Thomas's framework rather than any deficiency in his reasoning. The proof is, by the emerging consensus of the mathematical community, almost certainly valid. It establishes what Thomas claimed it established, that within the extended framework he spent 22 years developing, there exists a class of mathematical statements in the penumbra, at the edge, that are both provably true and provably beyond the reach of any framework that does not include the specific extensions Thomas built. It reaches the horizon that Gödel's work seemed to make permanently unreachable. It does not violate Gödel. It does not prove things that Gödel's theorems say cannot be proven. It does something subtler and stranger. It extends the territory of the provable into a region that was previously neither provable nor disprovable, a region that simply sat there at the edge of mathematics, unnamed and unreached, for 100 years. And at the edge, in that region, the proof finds its conclusion. The conclusion is the last symbol. The symbol Thomas invented in the moment he needed it. The symbol that no one who has looked at it can agree on how to interpret, because it does not behave like a mathematical object in any conventional sense. It has the formal properties of a value. It sits in the place a value should sit, at the end of a chain of reasoning that has been building toward a specific result. But it is not a value. It is not a number or a function or a set or a relation or any other kind of mathematical entity that has a standard interpretation. It is, as 4 separate reviewers have independently concluded using 4 independent lines of reasoning, something more like an operator than a value. Something that does something rather than meaning something. Something that, when you reach it at the end of a proof, does not tell you what the answer is but tells you what to do with the question. It tells you to follow it. Professor Heinrich Strauss of the University of Vienna, one of the world's leading authorities on mathematical logic and one of the 43 reviewers, wrote in his analysis, submitted 6 weeks after Thomas's disappearance, "I have spent my career in the formal study of what mathematics can and cannot do. I have never, in 40 years, encountered a result that I would describe as an instruction rather than a conclusion. The final symbol of the Vael proof is an instruction. I cannot tell you what it instructs, because the instruction exists in a mathematical register that our current frameworks do not have the vocabulary to translate. I can tell you that it is valid. I can tell you that it follows, with complete logical necessity, from everything that precedes it. And I can tell you that Thomas Vael, who built those preceding steps over 22 years with extraordinary care and intelligence, understood what it instructed. The text message he sent suggests he understood it very well. He paused in his written analysis, in a way that is unusual in mathematical writing, and then added, "I find myself wondering, not for the first time since I began this review, what it would feel like to follow it." Part 7. The People Left Behind. Isabelle Moreau has not published anything since Thomas's disappearance. This is not because she has stopped working. She works, according to colleagues, with the same sustained focus she has always brought to her research. She simply has not submitted anything for publication. When asked about this, she says she is working on something that is not ready yet. When pressed on what, she changes the subject. She has, however, done one thing publicly. She has written a careful and precise account of Thomas's framework, not the final proof, which is being reviewed by the community through other channels, but the 22 years of construction that preceded it, the 47 notebooks, the long approach to the edge. The account is not a mathematical paper. It is something between a biography and a technical history, written with the dual literacy of a person who understood Thomas's work at the deepest level and also knew him as a human being, as a colleague, as the person whose lunch invitation she issued and whose succulent plant she chose and whose text message she read standing in her kitchen on the morning he was already gone. The account has been circulating privately among mathematicians who knew Thomas. It has not been published. Isabelle says it is not finished. One colleague who has read it described it as the saddest and most beautiful piece of mathematical writing they had ever encountered, which is not a description that would have surprised Thomas, who believed that the two qualities were frequently companions. Thomas's family, his parents in Ghent, now in their late 70s, and his 2 younger sisters, both engineers, both precise and practical and deeply at a loss, have handled his disappearance with the stoic bewilderment of people who raised a son and brother who always lived partly somewhere else and who have now, it seems, gone there completely. His mother said, in the only statement the family has made publicly, Thomas spent his whole life looking for something that most people would say wasn't there. We didn't always understand what he was looking for. We always believed he would find it. We just didn't think. We didn't know that finding it would mean. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. His doctoral supervisor from Paris, a 74-year-old mathematician named Professor Adrien Leclerc, who had recognized Thomas's particular gifts 30 years ago and had spent those 30 years watching them develop with the quiet pride of a person who had identified something rare early, said this. I told him once, early in his doctoral work, that the questions he was asking were either the most important questions in mathematics or the questions of a man who was going to spend his career tilting at windmills. He said that from where he was standing those two things looked the same. He was right. I was wrong about which one it was. Part 8. The Temperature Anomaly. The 19-second temperature drop in the corridor outside room 412 at 11:52 p.m. on April 3 has been examined by the building's facilities engineers, by a physicist from the ETH Physics Department, and by two independent consultants hired by the police investigation. None of them can explain it. Temperature anomalies in buildings are common and usually mundane. Ventilation fluctuations, HVAC malfunctions, the residual effects of external weather conditions. The facilities engineers checked every mechanical system in the building and found nothing that could account for a localized 4-degree drop of 19 seconds duration in a single point in a fourth-floor corridor. The systems were functioning normally. The external temperature that night was mild for April. 8 degrees Celsius, no wind, no precipitation. There was no mechanical reason for the corridor to suddenly drop 4 degrees for 19 seconds and then return to normal. The physicist from the ETH Physics Department, a thermodynamicist named Dr. Elena Bauer, who agreed to look at the data as a professional favor to the investigation and who has been characteristically precise in her communications about it, said that the pattern of the anomaly was the part she found most difficult to account for. A ventilation fluctuation produces a gradual temperature change that moves through a space. A localized malfunction produces a persistent temperature differential that decays slowly. What the system log showed was neither a sudden, sharp, perfectly bounded temperature drop that appeared instantaneously across a specific volume of corridor space, held for exactly 19 seconds, and then disappeared with the same instantaneous abruptness with which it had appeared. It looks, she wrote in her informal report to the investigator, like the thermal signature you would expect if a volume of air had been very briefly displaced, replaced by something colder, and then returned to its original state. Not heated, not cooled by mechanical means, but literally displaced and replaced. I cannot account for this with any standard physical mechanism I am aware of. I am noting it as anomalous and leaving the interpretation to others with broader frameworks than mine. 19 seconds. The same duration as the structured silence that Elliot Marsh's equipment recorded on the beach in Harlow. Nobody has noted this connection in any official document. Isabelle Moreau has noted it in her private account. She has underlined it twice and written next to it, not a coincidence. Part 9. What the whiteboard says to the people who read it. There is an effect that the Thomas Vael proof has on the mathematicians who work through it carefully, and it is an effect that several of them have now noted independently, with varying degrees of reluctance, in communications that range from formal academic analysis to private emails to a single entry in a personal blog that was taken down 3 days after it was posted but not before several people had read it and shared it. The effect is this. The proof, read in its entirety, does something to the reader. Not a metaphorical something. Not the intellectual excitement of a beautiful argument or the aesthetic pleasure of elegant notation. Something operational. Something that is more like a physical sensation than an intellectual response, located, and this is where the independent accounts converge, which is the part that is most difficult to explain, in the chest. A pressure. A warmth. The sense of something opening. The accounts use different language for this. One reviewer writes about a sudden and inexplicable spatial intuition, as if the room had acquired a dimension I hadn't previously perceived. Another writes about a feeling of standing at the edge of something very large, larger than the room, larger than the building, larger perhaps than the physical space I habitually inhabit. The blogger, whose post was titled, simply, "I read the Vael proof and I need to tell someone what happened," described it as the feeling you get in the moment before you understand something completely, the moment of almost understanding, except it lasted for several minutes, and at the end of it I understood that the thing I almost understood was not a mathematical concept but a place. Not all reviewers report this effect. Some read the proof with full professional engagement and report nothing unusual beyond the extraordinary quality of the mathematics. But enough do, 14 of the 43, by the informal count of those who have compared experiences, that it has become a known phenomenon in the small community of people who have worked closely with the proof, discussed quietly and with the mixture of scientific skepticism and personal honesty that characterizes people who have spent their careers in the most rigorous of disciplines and encountered something their rigor cannot fully account for. The last symbol, specifically, is where the effect is strongest. The reviewers who report the sensation most intensely are uniformly the ones who reach the final line and follow the logic all the way through to the last symbol and sit with it. Really sit with it, not moving on immediately, not filing it away as anomalous and proceeding, but actually sitting with it, letting it do what it does. Isabelle Moreau has sat with it the longest of anyone who has looked at the whiteboard and is still here to describe the experience. She spent 4 hours alone with the whiteboard on the day she found the office empty, before the police arrived and the room became a crime scene and she was asked to leave. She has not been back into the room since. When asked why, she says the answer is not that she is afraid of the room. The answer is that she is afraid of herself in the room, afraid of what she would do if she sat in front of that last symbol for 4 hours again. "He told me the answer was a door," she said once to a colleague she trusts. "He told me the last line was an instruction, not a value. After 4 hours with the whiteboard, I think I know what the instruction is. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm going to tell you that I understood it completely and I understood why he followed it and I understood why it would be impossible not to, if you had spent 22 years building toward it, if you had the framework he had built, if you could see what he could see by the end." She paused. "I don't have his framework. I've spent 8 years learning parts of it. I have enough to feel the door. I don't have enough to open it." Another pause. "I'm not sure if that's a relief or the greatest disappointment of my life." Part 10. What mathematics knows that we don't. Let us be precise, for the last time, in the way that Thomas Vael would have wanted and deserved. He is missing. His body has not been found. The office was locked from the inside and has been examined by forensic teams who have found nothing to explain the mechanism of his disappearance. The security footage shows him entering the building and not leaving it. The temperature anomaly in the corridor at 11:52 p.m. is unexplained. The text message he sent at 11:53 p.m. is the last communication anyone has received from him. The rational explanations exist. A man alone in an office late at night, having completed an overwhelming intellectual project, in a state of extreme cognitive and emotional intensity, could have experienced a medical event. The locked from inside door is difficult to account for in this scenario, but not entirely impossible. There are mechanisms by which a door can appear to be locked from inside when it has been locked from outside, if the mechanism is not carefully examined. The temperature anomaly is unusual but not supernatural. Unusual things happen in buildings. The text message is distressing but could be the message of a man who was already experiencing a medical event that was affecting his cognition. These explanations are possible. They fail, individually and collectively, to account for the totality of the evidence in a satisfying way. They leave too many loose ends, too many anomalies, too many coincidences that strain the definition of coincidence. What the evidence points toward, when you follow it the way Thomas followed his proof, all the way to the end without flinching, without retreating into the comfort of the explainable, is this. Thomas Vael built, over 22 years, a mathematical framework sophisticated enough to reach the edge of what mathematics can know. At the edge he found not nothing but something, a structure, a result, a final symbol that is not a value but an instruction. He followed the instruction. The instruction took him somewhere that is not here, somewhere that exists in the mathematics the way a point exists at the end of a line, necessarily, logically, as the only possible conclusion of everything that precedes it. He is not dead. He arrived somewhere. The somewhere is real because the mathematics is valid and the mathematics says it is real, and mathematics does not lie. Mathematics was doing its absolute truth thing, the only thing it has ever done, the thing it does independent of whether anyone is watching, independent of whether anyone is ready. It found the answer and it showed the answer to the only person who had built the apparatus to see it. And the answer was a door. And he went through it. And the universe, which has been keeping this answer since before there were numbers to express it, finally gave it to someone who had worked long enough and hard enough and precisely enough to deserve it. The whiteboard is still full. The last symbol is still there. The door is still there, open or closed or something in between, existing in the mathematics with the patient permanence of all true things. Somewhere on the other side, we believe Thomas Vael is doing what he always did. Working. Precisely. In the silence of pure certainty. Finally home. Epilogue. The notebook. The 47th notebook, the last one, the one that ends 3 days before the proof was completed, has a final page that was initially overlooked in the forensic examination because it appeared blank. It was not blank. It had been written on in a very faint pencil that did not register well in the initial photographs of the notebook. When a conservator at the ETH library examined the physical notebook under enhanced lighting, the writing became visible. It was not mathematics. It was a list of names. 4 names, written in Thomas's careful hand, each one followed by a brief description. Vael, cartographer, found the edge of the named world. Elliot Marsh, acoustician, found the edge of the heard world. Nina Cross, photographer, found the edge of the seen world. Callum Reed, linguist, found the edge of the spoken world. Below the 4 names, a blank line. Then, in slightly heavier pencil, as if written at a different moment with a slightly different pressure. Thomas Vael, mathematician, finding the edge of the known world. Below that, one final line. The last thing he ever wrote in a notebook. We are all going to the same place. We are just taking different roads. The conservator who found the writing sat with it for a long time before reporting it. She is not a mathematician or a cartographer or an acoustician or a photographer or a linguist. She is a person who takes care of documents, who spends her professional life preserving the written records that people leave behind. She read the 5 names and she read the final line and she thought about the roads that each of those people had traveled, the road of maps, the road of sound, the road of light, the road of language, the road of numbers, and she thought about where all those roads apparently led, and she felt something in her chest. A warmth. A pressure. The sense of something opening. She closed the notebook carefully. She filed her report. She went home and she sat at her kitchen table for a long time in the quiet and she thought about the road she was on and where it might be going. She has not told anyone about the feeling, but she has started paying closer attention to where she is walking. Case file number 0156, status, open. Last known contact, text message, April 3, 2024. Body, not recovered. Suspect, none. Professor Thomas Vael, age 47, mathematician, remains missing. The whiteboard is still full. The last symbol is still there. The door is still open. Are you precise enough to find it? The unnamed files, complete series. Vael found the edge of the named world. Elliot Marsh found the edge of the heard world. Nina Cross found the edge of the seen world. Callum Reed found the edge of the spoken world. Thomas Vael found the edge of the known world. 5 specialists. 5 roads. 1 destination. And somewhere, on the other side of every map and every silence and every photograph and every inscription and every equation, 5 people are standing together in a place that has no name because it doesn't need one. Because they are finally, completely, irreversibly there.